Everyone talks about Coca-Cola and Pepsi. But what if I told you the soda that truly changed everything was created by a broke, unknown salesman? During the worst economic crisis in American history? This isn't the story of a genius chemist. This isn't the story of a Silicon Valley-type inventor. It's the story of a man with zero credentials to failed products and absolutely no reason to believe the third time would be any different. And yet, he created one of the most iconic drinks the world has ever seen. You won't believe this. But his secret weapon was a banned ingredient. And a name that no one could even explain. This story breaks every rule. It started with failure, grew through mystery, and exploded during a time when people couldn't even afford food. And what no one tells you is, this man didn't just build a beverage. He bottled hope. So how did a rejected copywriter with no money, no investors, and no business training end up building a billion-dollar global brand? The truth revealed in this story might just change how you see success forever. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why. It almost didn't work. 1. Humble beginnings of Charles Leiper Grigg. You won't believe this. But one of the most iconic drinks in American history didn't start in a fancy lab or with a millionaire investor. It began in the dusty streets of rural Missouri in 1868, where Charles Leiper Grigg was born into a poor family with nothing but a name and a strong will to survive. No one in his bloodline had ever run a business, much less built a legacy. They weren't inventors, they weren't wealthy. They were simply surviving, and yet, from this unlikely soil, something remarkable would grow. Charles wasn't born with connections, and he wasn't handed opportunities. In fact, by the time most kids were learning how to write essays, he was already out of school, hustling to make ends meet. Imagine dropping out in a time when education was one of the only escape routes from poverty. That's what he did, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He worked odd jobs, doing whatever he could to bring money home. The truth revealed here is brutal. Survival often comes before dreams. And still, a spark lived inside him. As a teenager, he stumbled into sales not by ambition, but by necessity. He was the kind of kid who'd knock on your door, pitch you a product, and somehow make you smile doing it. No formal training, no polished script, just pure instinct and grit. He wasn't closing deals in Manhattan boardrooms, he was selling in muddy boots. But here's the hidden lesson: every no sharpened his blade, every door slammed in. His face made him sharper, hungrier, bolder. What really happened during those years on the road is hard to document. There were no LinkedIn profiles or glowing resumes. Just a man with a suitcase, a dream, and calloused hands. He traveled town to town, sometimes sleeping in barns, chasing the scent of opportunity. The rejection didn't crush him, it refined him. While others gave up after the first failure, Grigg was building mental armor. And in that silence, a quiet kind of genius was brewing. Then came a pivotal decision, one no one saw coming. Charles left everything behind and moved to St. Louis. At the time, it was booming with business, a wild frontier of trade and possibility. Most would have stayed home, clinging to safety, but not him. This move wasn't strategic, it was desperate. It could have ended here, but it didn't. He walked into that city with no money, no backup plan, and still believed he could build something that mattered. In St. Louis, Grigg found himself surrounded by innovation, hustle, and relentless ambition. It was like being dropped into a storm, sink or swim. But instead of being overwhelmed, he absorbed everything. He listened, watched, learned. There's a secret behind it. Those who observe first strike smarter. And Grigg, he was quietly taking notes while others were busy trying to impress. The foundation was being laid, not for a product, but for a revolution. Most people would have written him off. A poor dropout with a string of small jobs and no degree, come on. But what no one tells you is that greatness often hides behind humble faces. His story wasn't trending, no spotlight. Just a man chasing something bigger than himself. And even though the world didn't notice him yet, something was coming. Something that would shake up the industry and rewrite the rules, but first failure was waiting just around the corner, too. Early failures in the beverage industry won't believe this next chapter. After settling in St. Louis, Charles didn't just dive into drinks. He started in advertising. Yep, the guy who would. One day invent 7UP was first a copywriter, crafting catchy phrases and branding campaigns for local soft drink companies. He wasn't mixing flavors just yet. He was learning how to make products feel irresistible. It's a part of his story no one talks about, but this was his secret laboratory, where he studied human behavior and how emotion sells better than logic. This wasn't a glamorous job. He wasn't sipping cocktails or rubbing shoulders with executives. He was in the background, tweaking words, watching what moved people and what flopped. But what no one tells you is that this is where real influence is born, behind the curtains. He paid attention to what made people curious, what pulled them in. While others focused on ingredients, Charles focused on feelings. And that would later give him an insane edge in the market. Soon, curiosity became obsession. He wanted to understand not just branding, but flavor, what really made people crave a drink. He started experimenting, mixing essences, studying reactions, and before long, he decided to step into the arena himself. He launched not one, but two sodas, both with decent taste, both with real potential. But here's the shocking story. They both failed miserably. Shelves rejected them. Sales tanked. People simply didn't buy and it almost didn't work. His dream, already fragile, was shattered twice. Most entrepreneurs quit after one flop. Charles faced two back-to-back, and this wasn't some small hiccup. These failures nearly ruined his reputation. His finances crushed, his confidence hanging by a thread. The dream on life support, this could have ended here. And for many, it would have. But Charles wasn't done, not even close. What really happened next is a hidden lesson that entrepreneurs still overlook. Grigg didn't blame the market. He didn't cry bad luck. Instead, he analyzed, obsessed. He asked why people said no and listened. That's rare. Most people protect their ego. Charles protected his mission. He realized flavor wasn't enough. Name, emotion, timing, they all mattered. And if he wanted a hit, he had to nail every single piece. With barely any resources left, Charles started over, quietly. No media, no funding rounds, no cheering fans. Just him and a deep belief that the right formula was still out there. He spent years watching what stuck and what vanished from shelves. Notebooks filled with notes, ideas, blends. While others chased trends, he studied patterns. It was a slow burn, a silent grind, but it laid the groundwork for something no one saw coming. And while the world forgot his name, while his peers moved on to safer jobs, Charles kept testing, kept learning, kept failing privately. Until one day, everything changed. A strange idea sparked, something bold, different, a little insane. And during one of the darkest chapters in American history, he decided to bet everything on one final creation. A drink that would either change his life or end the journey completely. 3. The Great Depression. And one last chance. What no one tells you is that some of the world's greatest ideas are born in the worst possible times. It was 1929. The stock market had crashed. Banks were collapsing, millions were out of work. And right in the middle of that chaos, Charles Leiper Grigg decided to take one last shot. He was broke, ignored, and down to his final lifeline. This was no business plan. This was survival instinct. And yet, this desperate moment, it changed everything. With almost no money left, Grigg returned to what he knew best, flavor. But this time, he added something no one expected: lithium citrate. A mood stabilizer. Sounds crazy, right? But think about it. In a country drowning in anxiety, he created something that literally lifted spirits. You won't believe this. But the science behind it wasn't the focus, the feeling was. That first sip wasn't just refreshing, it was relief in a bottle. He gave it a name. So bizarre, so long, it bordered on comedy. Bib label lithiated lemon lime soda. Try fitting that on a billboard. Most would have laughed him out of the room. But this wasn't a branding fail, it was a placeholder, a formula still in progress. Charles knew it wouldn't sell with a name like that, but it wasn't about the name yet. It was about testing the reaction, and when people drank it, something clicked. They smiled. They came back for more. This wasn't some hip new product in a trendy cafe. It was sold in mom-and-pop shops, in struggling neighborhoods, where every nickel counted. And people were choosing it. That's what really happened. Even in a depression, with wallets locked shut, they were buying. Why? Because it made them feel better. In a world full of gray skies, Grigg had accidentally bottled sunshine. And suddenly, that long, weird name didn't seem so important anymore. Still, the odds were brutal. Distributors didn't want it. Retailers were skeptical. There was no ad campaign, no budget, no backing. It almost didn't work, again. But word of mouth was doing something that marketing never could. It was building trust. Quietly, organically, and one sip at a time. And here's the hidden lesson. When your product solves a real emotional pain, people don't need to be convinced. They believe. Charles didn't even realize, at first, that he tapped into something massive. He wasn't trying to build an empire. He was trying to survive the storm. But what started as a rescue raft for himself was becoming a lifeboat for others. And behind the curtain, he began to understand, if he could find the right name, the right message, he could turn this spark into a wildfire. The drink was ready. Now it needed a story people could remember. So he sat with the idea. Rethought everything, the name, the vibe, the way people would say it aloud. He needed simplicity, boldness, mystery, and soon, out of nowhere, he'd land on something that would echo across generations. A name so short, so catchy, no one could ignore it. No one saw it coming. But it would become iconic, and what happened next would rewrite his legacy forever. For the rebranding to 7-Up, no one saw it coming. But that strange, clunky name was about to disappear forever. Charles knew he had something powerful on his hands, but it needed a name people could remember, repeat, and crave. So he stripped it down, reimagined the identity. And just like that, bib label lithiated lemon lime soda became 7UP. 2 syllables, 1 punch. It didn't explain anything. And that's exactly why it worked. The simplicity? It sparked curiosity. You won't believe this, but even today, no one really knows what 7UP stands for. Some say it was because of the 7-ounce bottles. Others claim it refers to its 7 ingredients. One theory links it to the drink's pH level. There's even talk that the up was a nod to the uplifting effect of lithium. But here's the truth revealed. The mystery was the magic. It made people wonder, ask questions, remember it. And in marketing, mystery sells. What really happened was a masterclass in psychological branding. While others explained their drinks, 7UP invited you to feel something. You weren't just buying a lemon lime soda, you were buying a symbol. The name felt sharp, clean, optimistic. It jumped off the shelf. It stood out in ads. People didn't need to understand it. They just needed to want it. That's the secret behind it. Clarity isn't always better than intrigue. Most soda names at the time sounded like chemistry projects or doctor's prescriptions. Grigg flipped the game with 7UP. He tapped into the emotional side of consumption, the experience, the vibe, the feeling of being different. And when you think about branding today, from Apple to Nike, that same logic applies. You don't need to explain, you need to connect. And that's exactly what Charles did without even knowing he was decades ahead of his time. The design followed the same strategy: minimal, punchy, clean. Big white letters, a red circle, no fluff. Nothing complicated. It looked fresh, modern. It almost didn't work. People weren't used to that kind of simplicity, but instead of fighting it, they leaned in. What no one tells you is that most legendary brands are built on bold decisions like this. Decisions that feel risky at first, then obvious in hindsight. Suddenly, the drink wasn't just selling, it was spreading. Kids, teens, families. Everyone was saying 7UP, the name became its own character. It wasn't just a product, it was part of conversations, jokes, even slang. The brand had entered culture. Without a single dollar spent on national advertising, that's how powerful the rebrand was. And Charles, he was watching it unfold, one bottle at a time, but even with the buzz growing, the big question was still looming: would it last? Could a mysterious soda, born from failure and desperation, really stand against giants like Coca-Cola and Pepsi? The answer wasn't clear, not yet, but one thing was certain: people were buying. And behind every bottle, Charles Grigg's quiet revolution was gaining steam. The next phase, it would explode beyond anything he ever imagined. 5. Rapid growth and national success. You won't believe this, but during one of the darkest economic periods in American history, a lemon lime soda started flying off the shelves. While businesses were shutting down left and right, 7UP was expanding fast. People didn't just like it, they felt better with it. It wasn't a luxury, it was a small, fizzy escape. One bottle brought joy, and in a world full of layoffs and soup lines, that meant everything. No one saw it coming, but the drink that was born out of Grigg's last shot became a lifeline for others too. 7UP wasn't just a beverage, it was an experience. Something about the crispness, the lift, the vibe, it clicked. Store owners started begging for stock. Wholesalers couldn't keep up. Charles didn't have a massive team, no corporate machine. Just an idea, and America was thirsty for it. A major reason for this shocking success was the lithium citrate. Yup, still there. The mood-enhancing compound wasn't advertised loudly, but it was doing its job. Quietly, consistently, people drank 7UP and felt better. Was it placebo? Maybe, but what really happened was a brilliant accident. The formula gave people a subtle sense of balance, and in a time when stability was scarce, that feeling was priceless. What no one tells you is that some of the most legendary companies in history didn't grow because of strategy, they grew because of emotion. Grigg had no fancy MBA, no investor pitch. But he understood something timeless: people don't buy products, they buy relief. That was the secret behind it. While other drinks shouted, 7UP soothed. And in a noisy market, that whisper was louder than any scream. Within just a few years, 7UP was everywhere. From tiny diners in rural towns to bustling city markets, the green bottle with the red dot had become a symbol of simple joy. Kids begged for it, adults recommended it, word of mouth did what million-dollar ads couldn't. And here's the hidden lesson: if your product is unforgettable, the world will do your marketing for you. It almost didn't work. Remember? Grigg was just a broke salesman with 2 failures behind him. And yet now, 7UP was a top 3 soda in the country, competing with titans, holding its own. Growing fast. And Charles, he still wasn't a celebrity. He didn't want fame, he wanted impact, and his creation was making people smile when smiling felt impossible. That's what really mattered to him. But time waits for no one. The brand was exploding, yes, but Charles wasn't getting any younger. And deep down, he knew he might not live to see just how big 7UP would become. The foundations were laid, the momentum was real. But what would happen after him? That question would soon become reality. And the next chapter of this story? It's one most people never hear. 6. Grigg's death and the rise of a legend. In 1940, just as his creation was reaching national recognition, Charles Leiper Grigg passed away. Quietly, no media frenzy, no grand farewell. He didn't witness the full rise of what he'd built. With his bare hands, he didn't see the commercials, the billboards, the global shelves, and yet, his name was now etched into something far greater than himself. What no one tells you is that some legacies grow stronger after we're gone. He died not as a titan of industry, but as a man who almost gave up and chose not to. That choice, it echoed, "You won't believe this." But within a few short years after his death, 7UP had become a full-blown cultural icon. It was no longer just a drink, it was a symbol of refreshment, rebellion, and optimism. Kids knew it, grandparents stocked it. It was in kitchens, diners, road trips, movie theaters, everywhere. The truth revealed. It didn't stop evolving. In the 1950s, scientists and regulators finally removed the lithium from the formula. The public mood had shifted, and so had the rules. But by then, it didn't matter. The name had become bigger than the ingredients. The emotional connection was locked in. What really happened is this: people weren't addicted to the compound. They were addicted to the feeling. The branding had done its job, and here's the hidden lesson: your product is not just what you sell, it's what people feel. Charles had stumbled into this truth through trial and error, but the outcome was genius. Even without the magic ingredient, the love for 7UP didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. People didn't even notice the change, because the emotional bond, it had already been built. That's branding at its highest level. By the 1960s and 70s, 7UP was more than a drink, it was part of pop culture. It had mascots, catchy slogans, ads that made you laugh. It became the Cola, positioning itself against the giants like Coke and Pepsi. Bold, fresh, different, it tapped into a generation that didn't want to conform. And you won't believe this, but that rebellious energy, it started with Charles long before the marketers took over, but Grigg never lived to see it. He didn't get awards, he didn't bask in boardroom applause. He didn't cut ribbons or ring bells on Wall Street, yet every bottle that popped open, every sigh of relief after a sip, was a quiet tribute to the man who once had nothing but a dream and a lemon-lime idea. This could have ended as just another forgotten business story. But something deeper kept it alive, because legends don't need spotlights to grow, they need meaning, and Charles gave people something meaningful when they needed it most. What no one saw coming was that the story wasn't done. Not even close, because 7UP wasn't finished evolving. And what came next would take it from American icon to global powerhouse. 7 acquisition and global expansion. You won't believe this, but the little drink born from desperation didn't just survive, it expanded across the globe. After Grigg's death, 7UP began to attract serious corporate attention. Bigger companies saw its potential, and eventually it was acquired, passed through several hands, and became part of what we now know as the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, later merging into the massive beverage empire Keurig Dr. Pepper. From one man's vision to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, a true empire. No one saw it coming. 7UP, once sold by the crate in small-town shops, was now shipping across continents. Latin America, Europe, Asia, it didn't matter where you lived. Chances were, you'd find that signature green bottle on a shelf nearby. The simplicity of the brand translated everywhere. Language wasn't a barrier, emotion was universal. That's the secret behind it. When you sell a feeling, geography doesn't matter. The truth revealed here is this: global success is rarely about expansion, it's about consistency. 7UP kept its promise: refreshing, light, fun, different. Whether in Texas or Tokyo, the experience felt the same. And that's what really happened. A brand born in one of the poorest chapters of American history was now comforting millions around the world. That's not a business story, that's a human one. As the company grew, so did its strategy. Regional marketing, flavor variations, limited editions. But the heart of the brand stayed untouched. The identity Grigg built, the clarity, the rebellion, the optimism, still pulsed in every campaign. What no one tells you is that successful brands don't chase trends, they anchor themselves. And 7UP had anchored itself in something timeless, joy. It wasn't just competing with Coke and Pepsi anymore. It was holding its own, launching unique campaigns, partnering with celebrities, appearing in movies and music videos. It became a cultural reference, a punchline, a prop, a vibe. And even with the industry constantly shifting, 7UP kept finding new ways to stay relevant. Adaptability was its quiet superpower, and here's the shocking story. Through all these changes, ownership shifts, formula tweaks, global scaling, the soul of the brand remained intact. That's rare. Most companies dilute over time, but 7UP, it evolved without losing its edge. Because when something is built with meaning, it lasts. Charles may have never imagined this kind of reach, but unknowingly, he built something that could bend with time without breaking. Today, 7UP is a global force, billions of bottles sold, endless memories made. But beyond the data and distribution, it's a symbol, a reminder that from total failure can come iconic success. And yet, the most powerful part of this story? It's not the money or the market share, it's the lesson underneath it all. One more chapter remains, and it holds the reason why Charles Grigg's legacy still matters today. 8. Hidden lessons and timeless inspiration. What no one tells you is that behind every great product is a story of someone who refused to quit. Charles Grigg had every reason to fold. He had no degree, no wealthy partners, no family legacy to lean on. He failed not once but twice in the same industry, and yet, when most people would have walked away for good, he doubled down. That decision, it changed everything. Not just for him, but for millions of people who still drink 7UP to this day. You won't believe this, but Charles never set out to be a billionaire. He wasn't chasing unicorn valuations or fame, he was chasing relief. He simply wanted to create something that made people feel better, even for a moment. And that's the hidden lesson. Success doesn't always come from chasing money. Sometimes it comes from chasing meaning. That one bottle of soda was more than a drink. It was a service to the public. And what really happened is something every dreamer should remember. The path to greatness is paved with rejection. Grigg got shut down, mocked, ignored. He wasn't in the headlines, but he outlasted everyone. And if you're struggling right now, starting over, feeling behind, remember this. It could have ended here, but he kept going. And if he could, so can you. His story also proves that timing doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to exist. The Great Depression was the worst possible moment to launch a new product. But that's when he found his voice, that's when he created impact. So if you're waiting for the right time to build your dream, maybe the time is now, not when things are easy, but when they matter the most. There's a secret behind all of this. Simplicity wins. 7UP didn't come with a complex message, it wasn't built on noise. It was built on a feeling. And if you want to build something unforgettable, a brand, a product, a business, don't just focus on what it does. Focus on what it means. Grigg understood that before the world ever caught on. What no one saw coming is how relevant his journey would remain decades later. In today's world of overthinking, overbuilding, and overnight burnout, Charles Grigg's legacy stands as proof that slow, thoughtful persistence can still win. You don't need hype, you don't need validation. You need clarity, purpose, and enough stubbornness to keep pushing through every no until the world finally says yes. And here's what you need to learn from this mistake-driven, resilience-fueled life. Success isn't about being the smartest, it's about being the most committed. Charles had nothing on paper, no resume, no credentials, just belief. And in a world full of distractions, that might be the rarest asset of all. But how do you apply this now? How do you turn your failures into fuel? That's exactly what we'll unpack in the beginning of this story. So now you know what really happened. Charles Leiper Grigg didn't have a safety net. He wasn't the smartest guy in the room, he just refused to give up. Even when the world told him it was over. What if your next big idea is sitting inside a failure you haven't fully embraced yet? What if the thing holding you back isn't lack of money or credentials, but the fear of hearing no one more time? You've heard the hidden lessons, you've seen the truth revealed. Now ask yourself, are you willing to keep going even when it almost doesn't work? Because maybe your own 7UP moment is just one bold decision away. If this story sparks something in you, hit that subscribe button now, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story that could change your life. And tell me in the comments, what's the dream you refuse to give up on?